In 1971, the unusual horror film Willard was released and went on to be a major surprise hit. Wanting to capitalize on this, the studio fast-tracked a sequel. Willard was based on the novel The Ratman's Notebooks and was adapted to film by Gilbert Ralston. They rehired Ralston to write the screenplay for the sequel. There were two problems. The first was that there wasn't a second book, so the material would have to be based off an entirely original idea. The second was that Willard Stiles died in the end of the film, so who would be the focus of the sequel? Since we never actually see Willard die in the film, Bruce Davison pitched the idea of playing the character badly scarred and roaming the sewers commanding his rat army. The studio decided they would instead focus on their new rising star, Ben. Ben was the leader of the rats in Willard, and was the one who led to the main character's downfall. It seemed only natural to make him the focus, especially since fans of the original were more likely going to see it for the rats rather than the humans. Ralston wrote a script about a young boy who befriends Ben after he escapes from the Stiles house. The boy has a heart condition and is a social outcast, which makes his befriending the rat that much more plausible. They planned to get the film into theaters in mid-1972, which coincidentally was the year of the rat. Because of the success of Willard, other animal attack films were greenlit, and they were hoping to be at the front of that with a proper sequel. They hired Phil Karlson to direct the film. Much like Daniel Mann, who did the first film, Karlson had never directed a horror film before. Karlson started directing in the 1940s, doing comedies like There Goes Kelly and G.I. Honeymoon. Wanting to match the film with a song, Bing Crosby Productions hired Don Black to write and Walter Scharf to compose an original song for the film. They wrote quite possibly the first and only love song about a rat. They called it simply Ben's Song. The studio wanted Donny Osmond to perform the song, but he passed on it. They then contacted rising pop star Michael Jackson. Jackson agreed and recorded the track in late 1971 as part of his second solo album. With things moving ahead, they started casting. For Danny, the lead human in the film, they hired actor Lee Montgomery. Lee had just finished his first film, The $1 Million Duck, for Disney. He was also the son of actor Cecil Montgomery. Montgomery was only 10 at the time and was too young to have seen Willard, so he didn't know much beyond the fact that most of his co-stars would be rats. Montgomery was under contract with Universal at the time, and they rented him out to the studio for the film since he wasn't lined up for any other films. For Danny's sister, they hired actress Meredith Baxter, who had also just started acting in TV shows like The Interns and The Doris Day Show. For the rest of the human cast, they hired many industry veterans like Joseph Campanella, Arthur O'Connor, and Rosemary Murphy. For the non-human members of the cast, they brought back animal wrangler Mo DeCesso and his army of rats. For Willard, they had about 400 to 500 rats. Since they wanted to massively up the ante with the sequel, they had about 2,000. They also had about 5 different rats playing Ben. The rats were broken into groups. Each different group was certain rats they knew could do things reliably, such as walk on poles. However, much like the first one, in order to coax the rats into doing what they wanted, they used their favorite treat, peanut butter. Whenever they wanted the rats to go somewhere, they smeared it with peanut butter. Whenever they needed to have someone swarmed and attacked by rats, they covered them in peanut butter. They also had members of the ASPCA on set at all times to make sure the rats weren't mishandled or harmed. Filming began in mid-November of 1971. Montgomery was still going to school, so they had to work the filming around his schedule. Since he was underage, he could only legally work for a few hours a day. His mother was also on set every day to keep an eye on him. The exteriors were shot in different areas, mostly in Los Angeles, California. The interiors were almost entirely sets. The sewer was a huge set that took up an entire soundstage. The department store was a set that the art department built, covered in peanut butter, and filled with rats. On the first or second day of shooting, Bruce Davison showed up on set to see how the sequel was going. He talked to some of the cast and had a nice chat with Lee Montgomery, who was more or less taking over the Willard role. In the film, Ben's song is performed by Lee Montgomery, and then Michael Jackson's version is played over the end credits. When Danny's in danger, they had a little person stand in as his stunt double. Since the film was PG, they had to keep the women clothed that were in the steam room during the rat attack. The film culminated in an all-out war against the rats, with the humans going into the sewers with shotguns and flamethrowers. The rats fleeing the flamethrowers was done with a double exposure. The rats being shot, sprayed, or otherwise harmed were all done with fake prop rats. The finale of the fight took place in Ben's throne room. They did some unconventional marketing for the film. One of the things they did was have a contest during an annual rat race. At River College, they had a yearly rat decathlon. The The producers of Ben offered the winner a crawl-on role in the film. In a press kit for Ben, they bragged about the amount of rats used in the film and noted that they were planning on a third film to be released in 1973 that would have over 10,000 rats. The film wrapped around mid-December. The movie picked up right where Willard left off, so the opening of Ben was the end of Willard. They used this on the poster for the film with the tagline, "Where Willard ended, Ben begins." The film was released on June 23, 1972, and was a disappointment. It underperformed and didn't achieve a fraction of the success that Willard did roughly a year earlier. Roger Ebert panned the film, giving it 1.5 stars. He later listed it as one of his most hated films. To counter that, Michael Jackson's single for Ben's song was released on July 12, 1972, and went on to be a worldwide hit. It won a Golden Globe for Best Song and was nominated for an Oscar. Jackson performed the song live at the Academy Awards in 1973, but the song ended up losing to The Morning After by Maureen McGovern for the Poseidon Adventure. Jackson loved the song and made it the title track for his second album. With the film floundering, the studio paired it up with Willard as the Tear 'Em Up double feature. Since the film flopped, plans for the 10,000 Rats sequel were not surprisingly scrapped. Montgomery continued to do horror films like Burnt Offerings, Dead of Night, and Mutant. He later retired from the industry and now does real estate. Meredith Baxter later became Meredith Baxter Burney and starred in the hugely popular 80s sitcom Family Ties. With much bigger and more successful animal attack films coming out like Jaws, Ben was quickly forgotten. As is with a lot of these films, over the years it grew a cult audience, and is much more popular now than it was back in 1972. Many people have said the film would most likely have been forgotten, if not for Jackson's rendition of Ben's song. In 2003, Glenn Morgan remade the original film Willard with Crispin Glover. In the film, Glover does a cover of Ben's song, complete with a music video.
And the two of us need look no more. We both found what we were looking for.
In the late 2000s, Lee Montgomery reunited with Willard star Bruce Davidson for a Tear 'Em Up autograph session at a horror convention. Ben is an unusual horror film. The tonal shifts are extreme. We go from a socially broken kid singing and doing puppet shows for a rat to hundreds of rats chewing people to death. The body count in this is way higher than the original, and the whole thing ends with thousands of rats being burned alive. It's a rarity to have something so lighthearted and then so brutal. While Ben's song is a beautiful and haunting track, some complained about how out of place it feels at the end. Personally, I think it worked well for the film. On top of keeping it relevant after all these years, it was a way to end the film out on a somber note. This poor kid finally has a friend and the entire town wants him dead. He doesn't understand the threats the rats pose. He just sees that his friend and family, who have been nothing but peaceful to him, are being killed and there's nothing he can do about it. Ben's a good follow-up to Willard, but overall it's an odd film. Everyone in the film is sympathetic in some way. Danny's a lost soul. His family just wants to help him deal with his condition and the loss of his father, and even the cops are just trying to protect their town from an invasion. Also, of course, is Ben. He's just a hyper-intelligent rodent who's just doing what he was programmed by nature to do. Personally, I feel bad watching what goes on in the film, but to be honest, I wouldn't want Ben's family near my town either.
I love you, Ben.